Imagine being a child, dreaming you were destined to claw through dense jungle and rugged terrain in a war-torn land. Richard Burke realized at a young age that was his destiny. He was destined to serve his country.
I think I was probably 10 or 11 years old, and I knew I was going to be a Marine, and I knew I was going to be in a war.
His premonition would come true, and at a cost.
Vietnam came along at just the wrong time, I guess. I got to fulfill my fantasies. Never fantasize about that again.
Burke joined the Marine Corps in 1966, serving 2 years in Vietnam. While in the Corps, the Garden City, Kansas native says he endured his fair share of enemy fire, though he was fortunate not to see hand-to-hand combat.
It would be where maybe 3 to 30 Viet Cong or North Vietnamese would try to penetrate through our barbed wire, concertina wire, and so we would have firefights. 99% of those were at night.
Burke, a corporal, worked as head of the fuel dump. And while in Vietnam, the high school dropout decided to get his GED. But the Marine says his classroom was anything but normal. After weeks of tests, Burke was rounding the finish line as he prepared to take the math portion of his exams.
I took my test and sat out in the middle of the fuel dump next to the ocean, telling my guys what to do, and all of a sudden we started getting artillery, and I'm sitting there taking a goddamn test. Which I passed.
But Burke says despite the frightening moments he survived, for him, Vietnam was not a constant conflict. Like the flower children of the 60s, Burke says he and other Marines had their fair share of fun abroad.
When we had fuel delivered from Da Nang, I could order a pallet of beer for $2.40 a case. And we had all the beer we needed. So, you know, and we smoked a lot of ganja.
After leaving Vietnam and the military behind, Burke returned to an outraged country engulfed in heated anti-war protests. Burke began to question his military service and soon chose a different career path upon returning to Kansas.
I became a hippie, so to speak. Over the years, I did a lot of drugs. I bought and sold drugs.
But Burke, a former drug runner turned preschool teacher, now a 64-year-old entrepreneur, says he has no regrets.
I ran cocaine from Key West, Florida, to Lawrence. I did that 6 times. I'd go down and get a kilo, which is 2 pounds about, and drive it back to Lawrence. And I almost got caught the 6th time and
that was it?
Retired from that business.
After settling in Lawrence decades ago, Vietnam and a life of crime behind him, Burke began to experience post-traumatic stress almost 40 years after leaving the war zone.
In 2005, I had to go in for 39 radiation treatments because I have prostate cancer. I got it from Agent Orange when I was in Vietnam.
According to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, Agent Orange is a blend of tactical herbicides the U.S. military sprayed from 1962 to 1971 to remove trees and dense tropical foliage that provided enemy cover. And Burke says a toxic substance also prevented him from fulfilling a lifelong dream.
I've tried to have children with 3 different women, and finally the doctor said that my sperm couldn't swim, probably because of Agent Orange.
Burke says after undergoing chemotherapy in his 60s, he began to suffer from nightmares of Vietnam, something he rarely struggled with in the decades before. He turned to group therapy provided by the Topeka VA clinic, and the Marine says he's since grown fond of his group of veterans who served in conflicts ranging from Iraq and Afghanistan to Bosnia and Kuwait.
We're a very tight group. We talk about the full spectrum of life. Some days it's very boring, some days it's very intense.
And Burke, who's found success in life since his service abroad, says he now takes each day as it comes.
You almost have to force yourself to get up and get in that shower, and go out, and socialize, see people, because that's a big help.
And most of all, while he continues to struggle with his time in Vietnam and comprehending the 10-year war that just ended, Burke says it's important to remember that nothing is ever promised, and his lifelong wounds prove it.
Is that the price I paid for being in a war? I guess that's the price I paid. I just wish people would finally quit the war shit and try to save our planet and each other.